The sound is the first thing. Not the wind. Not the snow. The sound. A deep, mechanical groan, like a steel cable pulled to its limit, echoing across a valley that hasn't seen a human being in 3 months. Then a crack. Sharp and absolute. Like a gunshot. And then Ray Kowalski is falling. Not a stumble. Not a slip. A full, catastrophic fall, the kind where your brain doesn't catch up until you're already airborne. His snowshoes clip the cornice edge. The packed snow gives way in a slab the size of a pickup truck. He drops 8 feet into a ravine he didn't know existed, hits the slope at 45 degrees, and starts tumbling. He doesn't scream. Experienced men rarely do. They bite down. When he stops moving, he's face down in 3 feet of powder, one arm pinned beneath him, his pack twisted sideways, and the world is utterly, completely silent. For 10 seconds, he doesn't move. Not because he can't. Because he's checking. Fingers. Toes. Neck. He runs the inventory the way a mechanic runs diagnostics, methodically, without panic. He's done this before. Not this exactly. But close. 12 seconds. He moves. He rolls onto his back. The sky above the ravine is a narrow slot of pale gray, the kind of gray that means more snow is already on the way. He looks up at the cornice edge, 12 feet above him. He looks at where his pack landed, 15 feet to his left, one strap torn clean off. He looks at where his snowmobile should be. It isn't there. The machine, his only motorized link to civilization, is somewhere above and behind him, buried under the same slab that took him down. Maybe destroyed. Maybe not. Either way, he's not getting to it today. Maybe not ever. He does the math fast. He always does the math fast. It's one of the things that makes him good at this. Temperature, minus 28 Fahrenheit and dropping. Nearest road, 60 miles south. Daylight remaining, 4 hours, maybe less. Radio, clipped to the pack he hasn't reached yet. Emergency beacon, same pack. Food, fire kit, sleeping bag, emergency shelter, all in the pack. The pack is 15 feet away. This is still survivable. This is still a story he can tell. In the dead of winter, the smallest mistake is a death sentence. This is Ice Survivors. Intro. Ray Kowalski is 46 years old. He grew up in Flint, Michigan, in a household where the heat sometimes didn't work and the windows rattled in January. He learned early that the cold is not romantic. It is not atmospheric. It is something that gets inside you and takes things away from you, feeling first, then judgment, then identity. He became a mechanic because machines made sense to him. Cause and effect. Inputs and outputs. No ambiguity. He spent 22 years rebuilding engines and transmissions before he discovered bushcraft the way some men discover religion, suddenly, and with complete conviction. His first serious winter camping trip was in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, at 41. He was out for 3 nights. He made every mistake a beginner makes. He packed too much. He sweated through his base layer on the first mile and spent 2 nights damp and miserable. He nearly frostbit 2 toes. He came home and immediately started reading everything he could find. In 5 years, he had done over 40 winter overnight trips in 6 different states. He'd completed a wilderness first responder course. He'd taken an avalanche safety certification in Bozeman, Montana. He carried a PLB, a personal locator beacon, on every single trip, no exceptions. He was the kind of man who told his friends, the wilderness doesn't care about your experience. It only cares about your preparation. He believed that. He lived by it. Which is why what happened next is so important to understand. Because Ray Kowalski didn't make a beginner's mistake. He made an expert's mistake. The kind that only happens when you know enough to feel confident, but not enough to know where your blind spots still are. He came to the Cascade Mountains in January to do a solo 4-day snowshoe traverse of a backcountry ridge system northwest of Snoqualmie Pass. He'd done a similar route in October. The snowpack was supposed to be stable. The weather window was supposed to be 3 days of clear skies followed by a front. Supposed to be are the 3 most dangerous words in the wilderness. Before we go further, drop your city in the comments right now. Where are you watching from? And if you've ever been caught off guard by a sudden change in winter weather, tell us your story. We read every single one. Ray left the trailhead at 6:47 a.m. on a Tuesday. He'd parked his truck at the lower lot, loaded a Polk sled with his 4-day kit, and attached his snowmobile, a reliable 8-year-old Arctic cat, to a secondary staging point 3 miles up the access road. The plan was simple. Snowshoe in for 2 days, drop the Polk at a cached supply point he'd pre-positioned in October, continue light for 2 more days, then reverse. The snowmobile would get him back to the truck fast when he returned. The first 6 miles were perfect. Cold, -12 Fahrenheit at sunrise, but clear and still. The snow was firm and well consolidated beneath his snowshoes, which meant efficient travel and low avalanche risk. He was moving at a solid 2 miles per hour. He stopped at mile 4 to eat a frozen Snickers bar and check the sky. Blue. Not a cloud. He felt good. He felt sharp. That feeling, that particular brand of alpine clarity, is something experienced winter travelers know well. The cold focuses the mind in a way that nothing else does. Your senses are heightened. You notice everything. The quality of light on a snow slope. The way the wind sounds different when it comes off a ridgeline versus a valley. The creak of your pack straps. The rhythm of your breathing. Ray was in that state. Moving well, thinking clearly, completely in his element. He reached the snowmobile staging point at 9:15 a.m., secured the Polk to a marked tree, and switched to snowshoes only for the upper route. The next waypoint was a saddle at 6,200 feet, the gateway to the ridge traverse. He'd been to that saddle in October. He knew the terrain. What he didn't know, couldn't have known from the ground, was that the early December snow cycle had deposited an unusually deep slab on the leeward side of the approach ridge. The prevailing winds had loaded the slope for 6 weeks. It looked solid. It tested solid when he probed it with his pole. It wasn't solid. He was 200 feet below the saddle, traversing a 40-degree slope along a line he'd used in October, when he felt the surface shift beneath his left foot. Not collapse, shift. Like a deck of cards being slid sideways. He knew immediately what it was. He had 2 seconds. Maybe 3. He drove his uphill pole into the slope and tried to arrest. The slab, maybe 50 feet wide, running 6 inches deep, released above him in a long, lateral crack. The noise was enormous in the silence. And then it was moving, and he was in it, and physics had the final say. The fall was controlled in the first second. He was trying to self-arrest, trying to get flat, trying to kill his momentum. Then his left snowshoe caught a buried rock and torqued his ankle hard, and the controlled fall became a tumble, and the tumble became the ravine. He came to rest in 3 feet of powder, face down, arm pinned, pack twisted. 12 seconds of stillness. Then he moved. His first priority was the pack. He got to it in 4 minutes of careful movement. His ankle was sore but mobile, which meant ligament strain, not fracture. The pack had fared reasonably well. The tent was intact. The sleeping bag was intact. The stove was intact. The PLB was intact. The radio was not intact. The fall had cracked the housing and shattered the screen. He powered it on. Nothing. He stood at the base of the ravine, looked up at the slope that had just tried to kill him, and took stock. The snowmobile was somewhere up there, buried or damaged. He wasn't going back up that slope, not today, not in these conditions. Even if the machine was functional, retrieving it without triggering another slide was beyond reasonable risk. He had his pack. He had his PLB, the personal locator beacon that would summon a rescue helicopter the moment he activated it. He had his fire kit, his shelter, his food for 4 days. He activated the PLB. A small green light blinked. Once. Twice. Then held steady. Signal sent. Someone would know where he was. Help would come. He just had to stay alive until it did. He checked the time, 10:42 a.m. Temperature, -22 Fahrenheit. Wind, picking up from the northwest. He looked at the sky. It wasn't blue anymore. Coming up next, the weather window closes faster than anyone predicted. Ray sets up camp, but the storm has other plans. And a single equipment failure changes everything. The National Weather Service had issued a winter storm watch for the Cascades that morning at 7 a.m., 2 hours after Ray left the trailhead. He didn't have cell service. He didn't have a radio. He didn't know. The front was moving faster than the models had predicted. It does that in mountain ranges. The terrain accelerates weather systems, compresses them, intensifies them. What had been forecast as 8 to 12 inches over 36 hours was already looking like 18 to 24 inches over the next 12. And behind the snow was wind. Sustained 40 miles per hour, gusting to 60. Ray didn't know any of this. But he could read the sky. And the sky was telling him the same thing. He had 1 hour, maybe 90 minutes, before conditions became dangerous enough to make movement impossible. He used that time well. He found a natural windbreak, a dense stand of old-growth fir trees at the edge of the ravine, their branches so thick with accumulated snow that they formed a partial roof. He stamped down a platform in the snow, 8 feet by 6 feet, packed it firm, and set up his four-season tent on top of it. He staked the tent with every anchor he had and ran a parachute cord between 2 trees as an additional tie-down. He collected wood. This is where his bushcraft training showed. He knew how to find dry fuel in wet conditions, knew to look under bark, knew that the dead lower branches of spruce and fir stay dry even in heavy snow because the canopy above them acts as an umbrella. He collected enough for 24 hours of small, controlled fires. He was back in the tent with the stove running when the storm hit at 12:15 p.m. It was extraordinary. Even by mountain standards, it was extraordinary. The wind didn't gust, it sustained. The tent walls pressed in and held. The snow came horizontally, then vertically, then in every direction at once, driven by a wind that seemed to have no single source but surrounded everything. The temperature dropped from -22 to -31 in 40 minutes. Ray sat in his sleeping bag with his knees drawn up and ran numbers. The PLB had been activated. That signal was received by satellite within 90 seconds of transmission and relayed to the COSPA-SARSAT system. The Joint Rescue Coordination Center in Seattle would have his coordinates within minutes. A rescue would be dispatched, but not in this weather. Nobody flies in this. Nobody drives snowmobiles in this. He had to wait. He was good at waiting. He'd spent 22 years waiting for customers to tell him what was wrong with their vehicles. He'd spent 5 years learning to wait in the cold, to stay still when every instinct said move, to trust the process. At 2:30 p.m., he heard the first crack. Not a gunshot crack, a slower, deeper sound. The kind that comes from something structural. He unzipped the tent door and looked out into horizontal snow. One of his parachute cord anchor trees had split at the base. The wind had been rocking it back and forth for 2 hours and the frozen wood had finally fractured. The tent lurched. Not catastrophically, the other anchor held, but one side lifted and the frame bowed inward in a way that meant the pole had torqued. He got outside in -31 degrees in 30 seconds, jacket, boots, gloves, hat. He knew hypothermia could begin within minutes at this temperature with any wind exposure. He worked fast. He got a new anchor point on a boulder 6 feet away. He got the tent restaked. He got back inside. It had taken 11 minutes. When he pulled off his outer gloves inside the tent, the tips of his fingers on his right hand were white. Frost nip. The precursor to frostbite. The warning shot. He tucked his right hand into his armpit and held it there for 20 minutes, not moving, breathing slowly through his nose, rewarming the tissue the way he'd been trained. The sensation came back, burning and aching, which was good. Burning meant circulation. Burning meant he hadn't lost anything yet. But it was a message. The mountain was sending him a message. You are using your margins. You have less room than you think. The storm continued through the night. Ray slept in 2-hour increments, waking to add fuel to the small stove that kept the interior of the tent above freezing. He ate carefully, half a day's rations for dinner, trying to stretch what he had. He did not know how long he would be waiting. At 3 a.m., he woke to silence. Not the silence of calm, the silence of accumulation. Snow was pressing against the tent walls from all sides. He pushed his hand against the fabric and felt resistance. The tent was being buried. He got outside immediately, even though every cell in his body protested the cold. The snow had drifted to 4 feet on the windward side of the tent, and the weight was already bending the poles. He spent 45 minutes digging out, reconstructing the snow wall on the upwind side to act as a windbreak rather than a burial mound. When he finished, he was soaked in sweat beneath his outer shell. Wet insulation is dead insulation. That was a problem. He got back inside the tent, stripped his mid-layer, and spent an hour carefully drying it over the stove, holding it close but not too close, rotating it, checking for scorch. He checked his food inventory at dawn, day 2, and he had roughly 2.5 days of food remaining. The storm had not passed. The sky was still white and heavy. The rescue was not coming today. Strategy question for the comments: if you were Ray right now, what would you prioritize? Option A, stay put and conserve energy, trusting the PLB signal. Option B, begin moving south toward the road while you still have strength. Option C, climb back up to the snowmobile to attempt repairs. Leave your choice and your reasoning below. Coming up next, day 3 brings clear skies, and something Ray didn't expect. A rescue team is searching. But the Cascades don't give up their secrets easily. And Ray's body is starting to fail in ways that no amount of experience can simply override. Day 3 began with blue sky. After 38 hours of storm, the silence that followed was so complete it had a physical quality, a pressure in the ears, a heightened awareness of every small sound. The creak of a branch under snow load. The distant percussion of a snow cornice releasing somewhere above. His own breathing, slow and deliberate. Ray emerged from the tent at first light and stood in snow that had risen to his waist. He looked up at the slot of sky above the ravine. Clear. Blue-white. The kind of cold clear that follows a major mountain storm, the air washed of every particle, the light brutal and brilliant. A helicopter could fly in this. A helicopter would be flying in this. He activated the PLB's manual retransmit function, not that it was necessary, the device transmitted continuously, but the act of doing it felt like sending another message into the silence. He set his signal mirror at the top of the ravine wall, propped against a branch he'd cleared of snow, angled to catch the morning light. Then he assessed his body. His right hand was functional, the frost nip had resolved without lasting damage. His ankle, which had been manageable on day 1, had swollen significantly inside his boot overnight. Not fracture swelling, the bone felt intact when he pressed it, but severe sprain swelling, the kind that makes every step a negotiation. He also recognized, with the clarity that comes from experience rather than panic, that he was in the early stages of caloric deficit. His body had been burning enormous amounts of energy in the cold, not just from activity but from simply maintaining core temperature. Thermoregulation in extreme cold can burn 3,000 to 4,000 calories per day even at rest. He had been eating half rations. The math was not good. He ate a full breakfast. He needed the fuel more than he needed the food security right now. If rescue came today, the food inventory was irrelevant. And if it didn't come today, he needed to be functional. The morning was quiet. He kept the fire going, not for warmth, primarily, but for signal. Smoke in a clear mountain sky is visible for miles. He used the green fir boughs he'd collected to make the smoke heavy and dark. At 10:47 a.m., he heard it. Rotors. Distant but unmistakable. The specific chop of a helicopter working at altitude. He was on his feet in seconds. He grabbed the signal mirror. He waved his orange pack cover. He fed the greenest boughs onto the fire to maximize smoke. The helicopter passed 2 miles to the east. It did not turn toward him. He stood and watched it disappear behind a ridge and waited for it to circle back. It didn't. He sat back down in the snow and stared at the fire for a long moment. He understood what had happened. His signal smoke was being blocked by the ravine walls. The helicopter was flying high and fast, doing a grid search, and the ravine was hiding him. The signal mirror required a direct line-of-sight angle that he hadn't achieved. This was the hardest moment. Not the fall, not the storm, not the cold, this. The moment when help was close enough to hear and couldn't find you. He didn't let himself stay in that feeling. He had learned, over years of hard winters, that the mind will try to go to dark places when hope is thwarted, and you have to be faster than it. You have to redirect before the darkness has traction. He thought about the problem technically. The helicopter was searching. It would come back. His job was to be more visible. He spent the next 3 hours solving that problem. Getting out of the ravine on his injured ankle was difficult. He made a makeshift pole from a fir branch and used it to take weight off the ankle on the ascent, packing the snow steps with care, moving slowly. It took 90 minutes to climb 12 vertical feet. At the top of the ravine, the world opened up, wide white slopes stretching away in every direction, and above him, that brutal winter sky. He laid out his bright orange pack cover in the snow, weighted at the corners with rocks. He built a second fire upslope, using the driest fuel he had, feeding it carefully to maintain a visible flame. He checked his signal mirror angle against the sun and practiced the flash technique he'd learned in the wilderness first responder course. 3 short flashes, pause, 3 short flashes. Then he waited. His ankle throbbed with every heartbeat. The cold at the exposed ridgeline, unprotected by the ravine walls, was appreciably worse. His body was tired in a way that food couldn't immediately fix, the slow deep fatigue of sustained cold weather exertion over multiple days. At 2:15 p.m., the helicopter came back. Different angle this time. Coming from the south, lower, following the valley floor. He had maybe 60 seconds before it would pass behind the ridge to the west. He flashed the mirror. 3. Pause. 3. The helicopter did not deviate. 30 seconds. He stepped onto the snow slope, waving both arms, the orange pack cover in one hand, the mirror in the other. The ankle screamed. He ignored it. 20 seconds. The helicopter banked. Not a lot. Not dramatically. But it turned, slightly, toward him. And then the nose dropped slightly, the universal helicopter sign for I see something. And then it was coming toward him, and the sound was growing, and Ray Kowalski sat down in the snow because his legs had given out. Not from weakness. From something else. Something that takes the strength out of you just as completely. Relief. The helicopter circled once, confirming. He could see the crew in the cockpit, see them pointing at him. They couldn't land, the slope was too steep and the snow too deep, but they held position overhead and a voice came through a loudspeaker, thin and metallic above the rotor noise. We have your position. Do not move. Ground team is 40 minutes out. He raised one arm in acknowledgement. The helicopter moved off to the east to guide the ground team. He sat in the snow at the top of the ravine, in -27 degrees, with a swollen ankle and depleted caloric reserves and frostnip scar tissue on his right hand, and looked at the mountains around him, the same mountains that had spent 3 days trying to kill him, and felt, more clearly than he had felt anything in years, the specific texture of being alive. Coming up next, the ground team reaches Ray, but the evacuation is anything but simple. And when it's finally over, Ray confronts a question that no amount of gear or training can answer: what, exactly, went wrong? And could it happen again? The ground team arrived 43 minutes later, 2 search and rescue volunteers from Kittitas County SAR on snowmobiles, moving fast through the post-storm silence. The first responder, a woman in her 30s named Carrie, with the calm efficiency of someone who had done this many times, did a rapid assessment while her partner set up a portable shelter and got a hot drink going. Right hand frostnip, resolved. Left ankle severe sprain, no fracture. Mild hypothermia, core temperature 96.1 degrees Fahrenheit, a full degree below normal. Early stage caloric deficit. Dehydration, he'd been rationing water along with food, a common mistake in cold weather when thirst signals are suppressed. "You did good," she said, wrapping his ankle. "You did everything right after it went wrong." He almost said, "No, I didn't. I should never have been in that position." But he didn't say that yet. That conversation was for later. The evacuation took 6 hours. The snowmobiles couldn't carry him directly in his condition. The terrain was too rough for a passenger on an injured ankle, so they rigged a sled evacuation, one machine pulling him through the snow while the other broke trail. It was slow and cold and physically uncomfortable, and Ray remembers it as the best ride of his life. They reached the staging point at 8:30 p.m. An ambulance was waiting at the trailhead. His truck was still in the lower lot, exactly where he'd left it. That felt strangely comforting, proof that the ordinary world had continued in his absence. He was transported to Kittitas Valley Healthcare in Ellensburg. His core temperature was brought back to 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit over the course of 2 hours using warmed 4 fluids and heated blankets. The ankle was immobilized in a walking boot, severe sprain, 4 to 6 weeks of recovery. The frostnip tissue on his fingers would require monitoring for the next several months, as frostbite injury can cause long-term cold sensitivity. He was discharged after 17 hours and ate a cheeseburger in the hospital parking lot at 2 a.m. He said later it was the best cheeseburger he'd ever eaten. But the real reckoning came later. Not in the hospital. Not in the first days of recovery. It came about a week after he got home, when the physical symptoms had faded enough that the mental inventory could begin. Ray is the kind of man who does postmortems. He does them on engines. He does them on hiking routes. He ran a thorough one on 3 days in the Cascades. The conclusion was uncomfortable. He hadn't made a beginner's mistake. He'd made a veteran's mistake, a mistake that is, in some ways, harder to defend against, because it requires you to distrust your own accumulated competence. He had checked the weather. He had filed a trip plan. He had carried a PLB. He had taken an Avalanche certification course. He had done everything right by the standard checklist. What he had not done was account for what he called the confidence gap. The confidence gap is the distance between what you know and what you think you know. It widens in proportion to experience. The more you've done, the more invisible your blind spots become, because you've survived so many situations that you begin, subconsciously, to believe your experience is a form of protection. It isn't. The mountain doesn't care how many nights you've slept in the cold. It only cares about the conditions on the specific day you're standing on its specific slope. Ray had been to that approach slope in October. He made an assumption about January conditions based on October experience. That assumption was wrong. The Avalanche certification taught him to evaluate slope angle, aspect, snowpack, recent loading. He knew all of those things. But he had mentally categorized this route as known terrain, and known terrain gets less scrutiny than unknown terrain. That's the trap. The most dangerous ground is the ground you think you know. There is also this: he had gone alone. Not because he couldn't find a partner, he chose solo deliberately, because he valued the clarity and self-sufficiency of solo travel. That choice is legitimate and defensible in many conditions. But it shrinks your margin for error to almost nothing. Every decision, every mistake, every consequence falls entirely on one person. In a winter environment, solo means there is no one to help you pull your hand out of an armpit and tell you your fingers are white. He's not done solo winter travel. He probably won't stop. But he does it differently now. He checks in at trailheads via text message to 2 different people. He carries a 2-way satellite communicator in addition to the PLB, not instead of, in addition to. He does a deliberate familiarity audit on every route he thinks he knows, specifically to find the places where he stopped paying attention. And he does something else. Every time he looks at a slope, whether he's been there before or not, he spends 60 seconds asking a single question: what would have to be true for this to kill me? Not is it dangerous? Not is it probably fine? What would have to be true for this specific slope, on this specific day, to kill me? If he can answer that question with concrete specifics, he can manage the risk. If he finds himself saying it's probably fine, he stops. He probes. He goes around. That question has kept him alive in the years since. He calls it the 60-second audit. He says it costs him nothing and has saved him everything. The snowmobile was recovered 10 days later by a Kittitas County SAR team doing a routine post-storm sweep. It was buried under 4 feet of consolidated debris snow, 1 ski bent, the cowling cracked. The engine was intact. It was repaired and returned to Ray 6 weeks later. He drove it back to the same trailhead the following October. Clear sky. Stable snowpack. 2 companions. He stood at the bottom of the access road for a moment, looking up at the ridge that had almost taken him. Then he geared up and went in. Because that is what you do. Not recklessly. Not with the same blind confidence. But you go in, because the alternative, to let a bad experience close off the wilderness entirely, is its own kind of loss. The mountain didn't beat him. It taught him. And the price of the lesson, though steep, was one he could afford to pay. Not everyone who goes into the winter mountains in the wrong conditions comes out. Ray Kowalski did. And he hasn't stopped being grateful for it since. Here is what 3 days in the Cascades at -32 degrees teaches you, if you survive long enough to learn it. 1. Your experience is not a shield. The most dangerous version of yourself in the wilderness is the confident version. Confidence earned through experience is real, but it must be continuously re-earned in each new situation. No 2 days in the mountains are the same. 2. Known terrain deserves extra scrutiny, not less. The places you think you know are the places where you stop paying attention. Ask yourself, what has changed since I was last here? What am I assuming based on a different season, a different snowpack, different weather? 3. Solo multiplies risk. Plan accordingly. File detailed trip plans with multiple contacts. Carry redundant communication. The margin you save yourself is the margin no one else can provide. 4. Weather windows are probabilities, not promises. Have a bail trigger. Know what conditions automatically change your plan before you leave the trailhead. 5. The 60-second audit. Before committing to any slope, any crossing, any route decision, ask the question: what would have to be true for this to kill me? If you can't answer that in specifics, you need more information before you move. 6. Eat and drink on a schedule, not on demand. Cold suppresses thirst and hunger signals. Your body burns more than it tells you it needs. Caloric deficit in extreme cold is faster and more insidious than most people realize. Stay sharp. Stay humble. Stay alive. This is Ice Survivors.